folks, today from the lobby of this hospital, I wanted to come and talk with you about what is sure to be a very unpopular opinion. This is an opinion about fairness, which is a huge topic of conversation in workplaces among leaders, between leaders and employees, between colleagues, back and forth amongst themselves. This is not going to be a popular opinion, and it's prompted in part by a couple of thoughts that I've had today. I'm here visiting my mother. I think it's not fair that she is going through what she is going through, and fair is beside the point. It really fair, as they say. I think I remember my dad saying to me at some point when I was a kid, and saying this isn't fair. I remember saying my dad saying something like, "Fair doesn't enter into it," and that is what I want to come to you today to talk about. Fair doesn't enter into it. There are so many conversations happening in the workplace where fair really matters. So don't hear me casting this net of fair is beside the point across everything. And yet I find fair, this word, this concept fair, being brought to bear in so many places. So we're here to cure the conventional unwisdom that we need to make sure that things are fair. So I want to start by reading you the definition of fair that I think is pertinent from whatever Google gave me as far as the definition of fair. Impartial and just, without favoritism or discrimination. And that's one. And then the second definition that I think is relevant here is without cheating or trying to achieve an unjust advantage. And I want to come back to the first definition I gave you, the adjective impartial and just, without favoritism or discrimination. And I'm going to say that's not quite it. There's an important element missing from that definition, which is a modifier of the word discrimination. Of course there's going to be discrimination in the workplace, and we need discrimination in the workplace. And don't hear me wrong, hear me out. We need discrimination that is just. We need discrimination that is relevant. We don't want racial discrimination or gender discrimination or height discrimination or any of these other discriminations that don't have anything to do with the task at hand or with someone's ability to deliver on the deliverables of the job. That kind of discrimination is irrelevant discrimination. Personal discrimination, discrimination around protected classes, that kind of discrimination is unfair, unjust, undesirable, and all kinds of uns. Where I experience that this question of fair is coming in is around places where the discrimination makes all the sense in the world. So, before we get into that a little bit, I want to read you something that is a big part of what prompted me to come on today to talk about what's fair and what's not, and whether or not the question of fair even enters into it. So I started maybe a week and a half ago doing something called morning pages. In morning pages, this practice, first thing in the morning, what you do is you write 3 pages in a morning pages journal. This is just 3 pages about whatever. You know, you just the assignment is keep the pen running. And there's some background noise. I hope you all can hear me okay. So you just keep the pen going for 3 pages, and you write for 3 pages straight. So so here's what I found myself writing in my morning pages today. So the design, the dictum, the idea, the intention is to write for 3 pages straight. That's an interesting quantity to measure. How many is 3 pages? And I promise you I'm coming to the fair part here. Depends on the paragraphing and the layout of your writing. Depends on the page size and the line thickness. Depends on handwriting size and style. So my 3 pages aren't the same as your 3 pages. It hardly seems fair does it. This is what I wrote. This is what my brain was doing with my morning pages this morning, and it's funny, and it has relevance to how fair is being addressed at work. Isn't it funny, I wrote, that my mind goes to fairness in this circumstance? And maybe there's a LinkedIn post in this, I wrote, where it's entirely voluntary that I'm doing these morning pages. Every word I write is voluntary. Every word, even the practice at all of writing these morning pages, is of my own assigning to myself. I can pass entirely or stop after a single mark on the page. I can choose to start this sentence, and in the middle, I can just... Every next mark could be the last mark I choose, and yet my mind goes to fair and fairness. My mind wants to consider that it's not fair because I like narrow-ruled paper, and that because my handwriting is pretty small, that I have to write them. I have to write more probably than most other people who are writing morning pages. And then when I remind myself, and this is a true story, when I reminded myself this morning that I am doing this practice entirely of my own volition, my mind asks me to consider that, yeah, it's optional for you to write morning pages, but other people with smaller paper and wider lines and bigger handwriting can get credit for writing morning pages with less total writing. That's not fair. And I rejoined to my own brain. Not one single person in the whole person knows that I am doing this. And as of this morning, this was true. It's no longer true because now you know that I'm writing morning pages. Credit isn't the point in the first place. And, dear brain, I wrote to myself, you clearly don't care about credit, given that you haven't told a single soul, not even your wife, about the fact that you are writing morning pages. And so who cares whether you're getting credit and whether other people are getting credit for writing morning pages while writing less? And my brain comes back again and says, well, maybe it's not fair. All those other maybe it's not fair to all those other people. You ever think of that? You get so much more thinking done because you have more to write to fill your 3 pages. You get more thinking done than all those other pool fools who are done sooner with less writing done. What do you say to that? And that was the last word that I wrote because that brought me to the end of 3 pages. But I was thinking also about, well, how do I calculate in the speed with which I can write, which is faster than many people can write? How can I factor in the speed at which I'm writing into this fairness equation? This is what our brains do. And I have the gift of maybe more self-awareness than some. But this is the same bullshit that we allow into conversations at work, and that people bring into conversations at work because their brains tell them to be looking out for what's fair and what's not, without that second part of their mind saying, really, come on, dude, like mine did for me. I found the whole thing that my brain was doing, I immediately found it amusing in a way that I did not find my thinking around what's fair or not for my mother to be going through. I did not find that immediately amusing, although it is kind of amusing what my mother's going through. Not amusing. What my brain does with it, kind of amusing. So what are some of the specific places that this comes into play? Working with a distillery earlier this year where they make bourbon. And they, not earlier this year, excuse me, early on in COVID, they make bourbon, and they have hospitality also, you know, a tasting room in a restaurant. And there were questions both from workers and the leaders of the organization, frontline people and their leaders, all the way up to corporate, about complaints that it was unfair that those folks who were on the assembly line had to be coming into work because they were making the bourbon. And yet people in hospitality, while the restaurant was shut down, were not coming into work. And the fact is that certain jobs require different things. Some people may think that it is not fair that in a clerical job, there's little physical effort, while others may, who are doing physical effort, may think that or who are doing much physical effort, may think that it's not fair for that clerical person, while the clerical person may be thinking it's not fair that these people who are in landscaping in our company, they get lots of fresh air. And the fact is that different jobs have different requirements. And thank goodness there's a diversity of humans on the planet. I loathe spreadsheets and really hate trying to work out how to make this cell relate to that cell. I just hate all that stuff. And I'm so glad that I can do a job that doesn't require my attending to those things at all. And I'm grateful for the people, my wife is one of them, who love the numbers and the spreadsheets and all of that kind of thing, that is for them actually enjoyable work. And so the fairness of what does my job call for by the very nature of the job versus what does your job call for by the very nature of that job, it just doesn't enter into it. If you don't like what your job calls for, then perhaps you are not doing the job that you are meant to do, or the job in which it is possible for you to flourish. And I remember working with a company where the person in accounts receivable, there's one person in accounts receivable who did not feel comfortable making calls to people whose invoices were late. And so she was simply not required to make those calls. In part because what her leaders thought was that it wouldn't be fair to require of her that she do something that would make her uncomfortable. I think that's ludicrous. That's the job. Kind of like it would be unfair to make someone for their job fly. Somebody who is terrified of flying should not be required to get on an airplane. I think that is 100% true. Someone who is terrified of flying should not be required to get on an airplane. And if they don't want to be required to get on an airplane, then they should not be a flight attendant. So this is just one of the places that fairness comes up. Fairness also comes up around the fact that people who work in the office are more likely to get awards, more likely to get promotion than people who are working from home. Now, this is where I think the pie gets sliced a little thinner, where the line is a little harder. Is it fair that the people who work in the office are more likely to be recognized and more likely to be promoted than the people who are doing equally good work from home? Well, that's a trickier question, admittedly, very tricky. And the truth is that there's a certain amount of reality involved here as well, that people who are in front of you are going to be top of mind in a way that people who are not in front of you are not going to be top of mind. And certainly there are things that we can do to mitigate that, and maybe we should. And is it really a matter of fairness? Is the discrimination here irrelevant? Well, I think it depends. And it's not immediately obvious in the way that so many workplace influencers want us to believe right now. And then that points to one other place, and this will be the last example that I give about where fairness really doesn't enter into it before. But although there are many, 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 many examples that I could give, this will be the last one that I give before I sign off for today. People talk about the influence of office politics on whether or not people get promoted. And this is, again, perhaps a more subtle difference. Cy Wakeman is a wonderful thinker around these things and wrote the book No Ego. And she says, people are always told leaders should not have favorites among the people who report to them. And she says, this is not a direct quote. She essentially says, poppycock, my word, not hers. Poppycock, of course I have favorites. Some people do a better job than others. Some people are more accountable than others. Some people make my life easier and some people make my life harder. Of course, I have favorites. And many people define politics in this way, that relationships and who likes whom affects who is promoted and who is rewarded. Now, where this politics is irrelevant to the workplace and perhaps unfair is when there are hidden agendas where people are being rewarded personally behind the scenes, and that sort of personal reward leads to favoritism that isn't relevant to the outputs and the success of the business. And then there's politics where it's simply, I'm doing a better job of managing this relationship than Joe is. And so maybe Joe is better at his job, or maybe our performance at the technical aspects of the job are comparable. And I hope that you can hear me well over the background noise. But at the same time, the higher you end up on an organizational ladder, the more important relationships are to the results. So my ability to develop a better relationship than the one that Joe has been able to develop, my ability to develop relationships and exercise human capital, and this kind of the gratitude economy, and which is something that I talk about sometimes. These potentially so-called political effects on who gets promoted and who is rewarded, those are not irrelevant discriminations. Those are relevant discriminations. And so I would posit that fair doesn't enter into it in this case. So there you go. This is my thoughts today about curing conventional unwisdom, the conventional unwisdom that we've got to be thinking about what's fair, and we've got to be working hard to make sure that everything is fair. I agree with that in principle, and in the way that it is so often practiced is it is brought to bear to level the discrimination that is relevant, as opposed to leveling only the discrimination that is not relevant to business outcomes and justice. I'm Aaron Schmuckler, CEO, Company Culture Engineer at the S-Works, where we work hard every day to help you cultivate the kind of culture where people and profits rise, where businesses thrive, and so do people, because they feel fulfilled. They want to stick around because they are being rewarded at every level of their being. Hope this has been useful. Bye-bye.